I hate to be the person that breaks up the conversations at the table. Sounds like everybody's having a very good discussion today. So thank you for being here. My name is Dave Sprague. I'm the CEO of Agriculture for Life, and I'm the chair of the board of directors of the Calgary Chamber of Commerce. So again, thank you all for being here. I think we're in for a really good day. I would like to start off by introducing some of our sponsors. Without their help, we would not be able to bring you events of this caliber. So I would like to thank our event sponsors, Scotiabank and BFI, and also to thank a number of other organizations who have supported us as executive supporters, and they would be the ATCO Group, the Calgary Airport Authority, NMAX, TELUS, and TransCanada. And in addition, our chamber supporter sponsors are Big Rock, Canadian Western Bank, Synovus, Meg Energy, Norton Rose Canada, RGO, Rogers Communication, and Stuart Olson Dominion. Would you join me in a round of applause for our sponsors, please? It's also my pleasure to introduce our head table today, and if you would do me a favor and hold your applause to the end, that would be appreciated. First and foremost, our guest speaker today, His Worship Naheed Nenshi. You know, I've done this a number of times, and you know, despite what I say about holding the applause, I'm going to remove it from future scripting. So, George Marlette, the Senior Vice President, Prairie Region of Scotiabank. Mike Gladstone, Manager, Government and Community Relations, BFI. Garth Atkinson, President and CEO of the Calgary Airport Authority. Peter Krushelnicki, President and Vice President, Stakeholder Relations, TransCanada. I tried to give you a promotion there, Peter, I'm sorry. Gianna Maynes, the CEO of NMAX. Brendan Dolan, Senior Vice President and General Manager of ATCO Pipelines. Andrea Gertz, Senior Vice President, Strategic Initiatives, TELUS. And Adam Legg, President and CEO of the Calgary Chamber, your head table. And also, I would like to recognize a few special guests in the audience today. If you could all please just give us a wave. The Honorable Dan Hayes, former Senator. Cindy Adey, former Minister of Tourism and MLA for Calgary Shaw. We have City of Calgary Alderman Richard Pootmans, Giancarlo Cara, Brian Pincott, Shane Keating, and Jim Stevenson. At the back, we have Joe Naheed, Chair-elect of the Calgary Chamber. Leah Lawrence, our second Vice Chair of the Calgary Chamber. Former Chamber President Ed Davis, and former Chair of the Calgary Chamber of Commerce, Lois Mitchell. Thank you, everybody, for being here. The obligatory warning to turn off your cell phones, and also there are comment cards, question cards on your table. There will be a Q&A following the formal remarks by Mayor Nenshi, and Chamber staff will be around to collect those. My last little duty is to introduce George Marlette. George is the Senior Vice President of Scotiabank. He will be introducing more formally the Mayor. And basically the instruction I was given by George today is to keep it short and just tell him that he's the best banker I have ever met. George Marlette.
Thank you, Dave. Dave's a former banker, so I take a lot of solace in that comment. So thank you very much, Dave. And Adam and the Chamber, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to be here today. I'm a proud Scotiabanker. I'm a proud Calgarian, and I'm very proud of our mayor. Our mayor has been in the job now 2 years and a few days, I think, and has done just a wonderful job. We at Scotiabank have a big relationship with the city, and our relationship with the mayor has been very, very good. What we like is the fact that the mayor's both tactical and strategic. And on the tactical side, we are very pleased with the way he approaches issues. He's cut down an awful lot of red tape, which means a lot to the 50 branches that we have in the city of Calgary. Strategically, he's interested in a bunch of issues that are our customers, and we have over 300,000 customers in Calgary, are interested in. And he shows a great interest in public transportation and affordable housing. On public transportation, we're very, very pleased to help him. Richness at Scotiabank is very important. And a rich city, Your Worship, isn't one where everyone can afford a car. Richness in the cities where everyone, including the wealthy, take public transportation. And we're so delighted that that's a priority with you. On a personal note, the mayor is extremely acceptable and accessible for all of us, and we've really noticed that over the past 2 years, and anytime we had an issue, getting to his office was very easy and very easy to do. So it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce our mayor, His Worship, Mayor Nenshi. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, George, for that very generous introduction. And it is my great pleasure to be with you today. And thanks so much to the Chamber for sponsoring this event and for all of you for coming. I understand we sold out pretty quick. So right, Adam, our usual issue, just need a bigger room for all of these things. And I particularly want to acknowledge, you heard them introduced already, my colleagues from City Council who are here today. A few of them are sitting at the kids' table up here. And I think I heard there's 6. Alderman Putmans, Alderman Stevenson, Alderman Carra, Alderman Pincott, Alderman Keating. Who did I forget? No, I did. Well, anyway, they're all here, and I'm thrilled to have them all here. I think we're 1 short on quorum. So I'm afraid, George, we can't take that vote on secondary suites right now. But one of the reasons I'm very excited to have my colleagues here with me today is because what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about not the work that I've done, though I appreciated all that in the introduction, George, but really the work that your council has been doing over the course of the last couple of years and give you a sense of where we are at for all of this. So to start with, I know a number of people were asking me on the way in whether or not I had a big announcement to make. So in fact, I do have a big announcement to make. I'm using PowerPoint slides for the first time in this job as mayor. Actually, someone told me I did it once before. So anyway, that is my big announcement. I will also say that on my way in, I had the pleasure, which is always a pleasure, of meeting my friend Lois Mitchell. And Lois said 2 interesting things to me. Number 1 is that she heard me speak 3 times in a row a couple of weeks ago. And number 2 is she had the opportunity to hear some internationally renowned speaker, and she came here today. So what I'm telling all of you is be very nice to Lois because something is wrong. She is becoming a glutton for punishment and hearing the same things over and over and over again. But what I want to talk to you about a little bit about today is where we stand as a community, where we stand as a city. And what your council has been working on and will continue to work on. So to George's point where he said I like to work at the tactical and the strategic level, I'm going to start at the tactical level with you and really help us think about what we're trying to do together as a community to make this place even better to live. And then we'll step back a little bit and talk about what that means for us to live together as a community. So here's a very, very simple question. And this question is one that I encourage my 24,000 colleagues at the City of Calgary to ask themselves every day, multiple times every day. How is what I'm doing right now making it better for someone to live here? And to me, that really comes down to the real goal of government and why we exist. We exist simply to make this place better for people to live here, for people to work here, for people to invest here, for people to raise families here. And that's really the mantra that this council has been acting upon is how do we re-engineer, how do we rethink what it is that we do as a city so that we're always asking ourselves that question. And of course, there are many, many ways to make life better for people to live here. We cut red tape, as you heard a little bit from George, and I'll talk a little bit more about going forward. We got more plows on the street. We're saving money for citizens every day and allowing them to access services better. We're building more recreation spaces for kids and seniors and everyone in between. Fewer people are living in poverty in the city. And lots of other things that we can count, that we can quantify, that we can measure ourselves against. And those are important things to count and measure and quantify. But we also need to think about what it is we're trying to do together as a community. How do we deal let me put it this way. Starting from the day after I was elected, I would get a very strange question, and I still get it today. And that very strange question is not, are you running again, though that did, in fact, start the day after I was elected. But the question is, what kind of a legacy do you want to leave in this role? And I always answer the question the same way, and it's a very simple way, which is I want Calgarians to be able to say, looking back on their experience in this community, something very simple. And that is, it's better now. When I deal with the city, it's better. When I call 311, it's better. When I take Calgary Transit, it's better. When I'm trying to enjoy and live and breathe in my community, it's a little bit better now. When I'm starting or growing a business, it's better now. It's better to be a Calgarian now. And that's really fundamentally what it is that we are trying to achieve. So the question that we have to ask ourselves, my colleagues and I, as well as all the rest of you, is it better now? And that's really what I want to share with you a little bit. Some highlights from our first 2 years in office, a little bit about what we're hearing from citizens. I'm going to share with you some hot off the presses data that we just released this morning, and a quick look at what we're looking at over the course of the next year. So I'm not a big fan of surprises when it comes to government. I'm a big fan of making sure that we have open, transparent discussion, participation from citizens, and we make decisions based upon that work. And that's why last year, as we began our term together and as we began our 3-year budget cycle, Council spent a lot of time engaging Calgarians, well over 23,000 Calgarians, as a matter of fact, not just on our budget, but even more important than that, on our plan for the city. And that's the genesis of this funny-looking chart that you see here, this little, you can tell I used to be a management consultant, right? I only know so many frameworks, and so I use them all when I can. This one we used to call the strategic temple. And I've got funny stories about it. It looks a bit like a Scotiabank, doesn't it, George? I have some very funny stories about when I say strategic temple, what people end up doing, and that's impossible to read. But I want to talk you through what that is. This was a unanimously approved roadmap by your city council on what it is we're going to focus on and work on together. The roof talks about what our vision is together as a community. Imagine Calgary some years ago engaged about 18,000 Calgarians in developing a joint vision for the city of Calgary. And it can be summed up in the words that are in the temple, which is Calgary is a great place to make a living and a great place to make a life. So the question is, how do we manage the growth of our community in order to get there? And in order to get there, we've suggested there are a number of key principles. Ensuring every Calgarian lives in a safe community and has the opportunity to succeed. Investing in great communities and a vibrant urban fabric. Moving people and goods throughout the city efficiently and sustainably. Making Calgary the best place in Canada for a business to start and flourish. And then on the bottom, the tickets to the game. The things that we have to do in order to make that work. Becoming a more effective and disciplined organization as the city, and changing the rules of the game to better ensure financial capacity. We have goals and targets and measurables under every one of those. In fact, more than 50 specific principles. I'm not going to go through all 50, I promise. But I do want to give you some highlights of what we've been working on in terms of each of those. So let's start with ensuring every Calgarian lives in a safe community and has the opportunity to succeed. So, as you know, Calgarians increasingly report that they feel safe in their city. Our levels of violent crime are the lowest they've been in a generation. We are working on, and since the 1970s, as a matter of fact, we are working hard, both with our partners at the Calgary Police Service, as well as with all of those areas that deal with safety in our own community, to make sure that that keeps going. See, I get to speak for council depending on regardless of how I voted on something. So I will tell you that council increased funding for the Calgary Police Service, which put the province off the hook. No, I mean, which allowed the police to hire an additional 122 police officers over the next 3 years. The Calgary Police Service has consolidated its functions into its new West Winds campus. There's a new deployment model to increase efficiency and reduce costs. And of course, we've maintained a wonderful focus on prevention and community-based policing. That's the safety part. Even more important for me is the whole idea of inclusion and opportunity. The great success of our city is that we have been remarkably generous in sharing opportunity, in allowing people the ability to live great lives regardless of their background. I'm going to come back to that towards the end of my remarks today. But I think it's something that's important for us to remember and to recommit ourselves to. And as part of that, Council launched the Calgary Poverty Reduction Initiative in partnership with the United Way of Calgary to create a 10-year plan to reduce poverty in Calgary. A number of you in the room have been engaged in this. It's very deliberately multi-stakeholder, private sector, public sector, nonprofit sector coming together to find new and better ideas to answer a very simple question. Whereas we have lots of people doing great work in anti-poverty work in this community, whereas we have people who can tell you amazing stories about interventions they've had with individuals and with families, the rates of poverty in our community have not changed in a generation. Child poverty remains stubbornly high. So together as a community, we have to ask ourselves why. We have to ask ourselves, what is it that we're doing that isn't working? And how can we do a better job to ensure that we have opportunity for all in this community? And that's something that we are certainly working very hard on through the Calgary Poverty Reduction Initiative. Investing in great communities and a vibrant urban fabric. Last year, the City Council chose to make a decision that many thought would have been controversial. And it was a decision to step into some tax room that the province had ceded. That's a very complicated discussion, but the province had left money on the table. And we chose to pick up that money off the table and create for the very first time ever a dedicated fund for community infrastructure. So things like, and half of it goes to life cycle replacement, half of it goes to new construction. So that is building a new central library, 4 new recreation facilities. It's investing in protective equipment for our firefighters, and importantly, it's doing things that are so unsexy and so important, like fixing the roof at the Englewood swimming pool. And these sorts of things really have made a huge difference, and people are starting to see incredible returns from that. And when I talk about the Citizen Satisfaction Survey, you will see that. So what does that mean for us as Calgarians? It means 4 new library branches, including a brand new central library. It means those much, much needed rec facilities in southeast and northwest Calgary are going to be built. Furthermore, we're working hard to support the principles that we laid out in Imagine Calgary to revitalize established communities, including downtown, making established communities more attractive for young families, and ensuring that new communities are sustainable in every way, financially, environmentally, and socially. That was a lot of politician gibber jabber just there. So let me tell you what that really means. It means we're fundamentally looking at how we grow in a brand new way, in a way that actually helps us to build the neighborhoods people tell us they want to live in. You know, when I was a volunteer doing the Imagine Calgary work some years ago, one of my jobs was to look through the 18,000 responses that Calgarians had given us and try and synthesize something out of them. Tough job, right? Actually, it wasn't tough at all. And the reason it wasn't tough at all is when we looked at those 18,000 responses, there was remarkable unanimity in what people were saying. It didn't matter if you were young or old, suburban or urban, if you defined yourself as left-wing or right-wing, your family status didn't matter. When you ask people, what kind of a neighborhood do I want to live in? What kind of neighborhood do you want to live in? People came back with a very simple response. I want to live in a neighborhood where I can walk to the store. I want to live in a neighborhood where my parents can live in the same neighborhood so they can look after my kids. I want to live in a neighborhood where my kids go to school and play in the playground with kids who are different than us so they understand not every family is like our family. I want to live in a neighborhood where that second or third or fourth family car is a choice for my family, not an absolute necessity in order to be able to live our lives. It's pretty straightforward. So the question that we had to ask ourselves as council, and this predated me, but we certainly continue to ask that question, is if it's so clear what people want, if it's so clear what the market wants, why aren't we building those neighborhoods? Why are we building exactly the opposite? And so trying to address that question has become a very important part that really forms the core of the work your council has been doing. And I'm really pleased to say that in consultation and in very close collaboration with the industry, with the development industry, we've been able to get there. Just earlier this year, we passed a master plan for a neighborhood in North Calgary called Keystone, North Central Calgary, north of Stony Trail. Eventually, that neighborhood will have over 60,000 people living in it. And as a result of our discussions with industry, it's going to look completely different than suburbs we built in this city over the last 40 years. Still, there will be lots and lots and lots of single-family homes with big yards. This isn't about taking that choice away from people. But those single-family homes with big yards will be situated in such a way that life will be better. There is, for example, not a single cul-de-sac in that community of 60,000 people. We're returning to an old-fashioned European style or old Calgary style grid system, which is easier to serve by transit, which reduces traffic congestion, which makes goods and services and people flow much more smoothly through the neighborhood. We're putting homes in close proximity to employment centers so people can live close to where they work and not have to get on the same few clogged arteries across the city. And we're putting in recreational and community infrastructure from the ground up, not as an afterthought. And we're doing that in partnership with private industry, and it's going to make a huge difference. You're going to hear a lot briefly soon about the growth management framework, which is a beautiful bureaucratic way of making something really important sound really boring. It is not really boring. The growth management framework will allow the city for the first time ever to try and facilitate the process of growth along where infrastructure exists, where transportation networks exist, and to build the city out in a thoughtful, rational way, instead of first in, first ready to build a neighborhood gets a plan, and we build that neighborhood regardless of what the impacts are downstream on the rest of the community. So we've again have done that in consultation with industry to create incredibly transparent and clear criteria, and I look forward to that being implemented towards the end of the year. Moving people through the city efficiently and sustainably, people and goods. So first of all, I have to say, I don't like the fact that we're using our snow removal program in October. Better in January. But what we have heard from citizens loud and clear is that the additional investment we've made in snow removal, as one example, is something that citizens value enormously. Clearing is now much faster and much safer. We now clear residential roads when warranted. We never ever did that before. And this idea of bringing in snow parking bans has allowed for much faster clearance of priority 1 and priority 2 roads, 30% faster, as a matter of fact. And we did some fun stuff with math, sorry for the accountants in the room, to make sure that we created a reserve so that the snow removal program wasn't forever going over budget. And it would have the opportunity to put money into a reserve in winters like last winter when we didn't have much snow, and take it out in winters when we have a lot of snow, which is not going to happen this year. I hope. I have always said, and I firmly believe, that investments in public transit are among the best investments a city can make. Not only are they investments in mobility and reducing congestion, they're investments in environmental quality, and they're investments in social mobility, as George pointed out, allowing people to live in the community without the need of a car. One thing that did surprise me when I was first elected is that Calgary Transit has operated all these years never having had a long-term strategic plan. So this year we launched Route Ahead, a program to develop a long-term capital, operating, and customer service plan for Calgary Transit. That will come back to council in December. I'm very excited about it. Some of you may have seen the draft of it. We're looking at creating a transit system that not only does an amazing job of bringing people downtown. By the way, our transit system does an amazing, phenomenally good job of bringing people into the downtown core. But we're building out the transit system to take people from point to point, east to west, north to south, outside of the downtown core. That is going to be probably, hopefully no one will choke on their creme brulee, an $8 or $9 billion investment over the next 30 years. It's an investment we have to make. And it's an investment that our colleagues at the other orders of government, the provincial and federal orders of government, need to make in this city, and I will come back to that over the course of the next 30 years. Currently, we have $0, so zero is not quite $8 or $9 billion, but we need to get there. And it's important to note that we're also making a very modest but important investment in active transportation. Currently, between 20 and 30% of Calgarians who work downtown commute on foot or on bicycle year-round. And yet, Our investments in the pedestrian and cycling infrastructure have been far, far, far less than 20 or 30%. Maybe put a couple of decimal points and a few zeros before the 2 and you'll get there. And so we're making modest but important investments in commuter cycling infrastructure, including the first ever separated cycle paths in Calgary, which will be coming into place in summer 2013. Those are good things, by the way. By removing the cycling infrastructure from the car and pedestrian infrastructure, everybody moves faster. And so we're looking forward to doing that. And we made some modest but incredibly important investments in silly things like making sure the sidewalks aren't broken, and that construction companies can't close down sidewalks interminably downtown. Because after all, everyone's a pedestrian for part of their commute. Right? Whether you're a pedestrian after you park your car or after you get off the train, or if you're a pedestrian for the whole commute. We've got to be able to make sure that people who are walking are able to do so. So for this crowd, you're probably interested in this one, making Calgary the best place in Canada for a business to grow and flourish. Lots and lots of things we're working on here. The one that's dearest to my heart is our Cut Red Tape initiative. And today you can go to cutredtape.ca right now on your smartphone and give us suggestions for how we can continue to cut red tape. We have already completed 2 phases of that. Phase 1 was with city employees. Phase 2 was with business stakeholders, including the Chamber of Commerce, and we're implementing those as we go along, which I'm excited about. We also did something that the Chamber of Commerce has been calling for many, 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 many years, and I'm happy that we finally did it this year, which is we have agreed to phase out the standalone business tax. Calgary was one of the very few cities that continued to have a standalone business tax, and we are now following the lead of other places and consolidating the standalone business tax with the non-residential property tax. And we're doing that over the course of the next 7 years, which I'm very excited about. And in particular, many of you know the great work done by our colleagues at Calgary Economic Development. And their Be Part of the Energy campaign has been yielding incredible results. Going out particularly on talent recruitment, on finding labor force to help come here. I know I'm looking at Bruce Graham right there, and so he'll just nod his head if I get these numbers close to right, which is that recently there was a mission to Ireland and Scotland, which, by the way, are among the very best places we could go to recruit talent to come here. And in particular in Ireland, the career fair that was done there with a number of local business partners, no one had seen responses like that. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of resumes, hundreds of interviews, and many, many people hired. And I think that is an important part of making sure that we can continue to be a great place for business. I should highlight as well on that our Calgary Economic Development strategy remains very, very strong. And that strategy is based on a fundamental precept, which is that jobs don't attract people, people attract jobs. And it's vitally important, and so many of you heard me say this so many times, it is vitally important that we continue to attract labor here. We continue to attract people who want to live here, who want to work here, who want to invest here, who want to raise families here. And that is how we ultimately achieve economic vibrancy. So as I always say, and many of you have heard me say, we need that top graduating engineer from the best university in Shanghai or Dubai or Mumbai or anywhere else that ends in I. We want her to be able to say, I want to go to Calgary. I want to be at the top of my profession. I want to live in a great place. And that's something I can do in Calgary. We have to make sure that those people, whether they're engineers or artists, from wherever they come in the world, see this as a beacon, see this city as a place that they want to be. And that ultimately will be the core of our economic success. Very briefly then, becoming a more effective and disciplined organization. We are working very hard to transform government. In fact, that's what we call it, transforming government. To think about how we can realign the processes within the city corporation to do better work. We've instituted, we fundamentally changed the budget process, as many of you know, with asking administration to look for aggressive cost efficiencies and a lower tax increase. We actually saved over $100 million in this year's budget while maintaining our property taxes as amongst the lowest in Canada. Transforming government will continue to work to try and make the city more efficient and even more citizen-centered. And finally, we have instituted zero-based budget reviews of every business unit at the city. The next one to go through is parks, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what the results are there. Finally, you're going to hear a lot from me over the next few months about what we're calling a city charter for Calgary. We've signed a memorandum of understanding with the provincial government to create these charters for Calgary and for Edmonton to better reflect the needs and responsibilities of big cities. This is really, really dry and the single most important thing the City Council can do for you. To make sure that we've got the tools we need and the decision-making authority we need to be able to effectively govern this city of 1.1 million people. It's unbelievably important, and we cannot allow it as thoughtful citizens to get boiled down into a crass discussion about tax grabs or the city being greedy. We have to be able together as citizens to be able to have a very thoughtful discussion about what we need as a community in order to succeed. So, there are lots and lots and lots of small things, and I know most politicians would stand up here and give you a checklist of all the things we've managed to accomplish. I won't do that. Okay, I'll give you a few. We have improved our project management of major capital projects significantly. I always say, and those of you who work with the city or are affiliated bodies know very well, Gianna, what my favorite 4 words are. On time, on budget. Sometimes I prefer on time, under budget, but one can't have everything. And that is something we're continuing to work on. The airport tunnel, for example, on time, on budget. The West LRT, mostly on time, mostly on budget for the largest public works project in Calgary history, and so on. The cut red tape, one of my favorite examples of cut red tape is our little food truck program. People often think of the food trucks as being something that I championed because I like food and I like trendy things. Both of those things are true. But the real reason for the food truck pilot project was actually to prove a point. To show that we could take a brand new kind of business, create a brand new licensing and regulatory regime that was simple and easy and allow entrepreneurs to start new businesses quickly. 20 days after the first meeting on food trucks, we had 9 new small businesses on the road. We now have 30 new small businesses on the road. It's been so popular, we've actually had to put in a moratorium on new ones because we actually need time to process all the applications. And it's been enormously popular with the public. So we've helped entrepreneurs, we've helped the public, we've created vibrancy on our streets, and I think that's a great example of the bureaucracy of the city actually showing how incredibly resilient and flexible that it can be. So, what are we up to now? Give you 3 quick examples of things that we have to work on over the course of the next year. I've talked about all of them already. We'll finish off Route Ahead, the Calgary Transit Program, an integrated 30-year plan. We'll continue to work on a major program called Transforming Planning, which is helping us kind of not only cut red tape, but really blow up and rebuild the whole process around development and planning. The idea here is very straightforward. Make it easier to build good stuff. Notice I underlined the word good. That's the hard part. But we've got to be able to do a much better job of that and the work on the city charter with the province. So very briefly, how are Calgarians feeling? And the answer is really good. Really, really good. People are extraordinarily happy and extraordinarily optimistic, and that makes me happy and optimistic. We had a survey done this summer. Angus Reid surveyed citizens in 4 cities across the country. No surprise, Calgary came in first on all but one measure. The measure that we tied for first with Vancouver on was being a green city. But what we see is that people are enormously proud of the place. Calgary is a great place to start a business. 75% of people agree. Calgary's a place you can find a good job. 88% of people agree. Calgary's a livable city. 89% of people agree. The one that was the most important for me was people were asked the question, is yours a city on the rise? And an extraordinary 90% of Calgarians agreed that this is a city on the rise. Just today, exactly 2 hours ago, depending on how long I've been talking, we released the results of the City of Calgary's annual Citizen Satisfaction Survey, which is work that is conducted by an unbiased third party, Ipsos, to see how people were feeling. And the results are unambiguously positive, unambiguously exciting. Citizens have a strong sense of pride and are proud to be Calgarian, an increase of 5 percentage points over the last year. Calgarians believe that the City of Calgary municipal government fosters a city that is inclusive and accepting of all. Calgarians believe that the city is moving in the right direction. Many, many, many citizens say the quality of life is good in this city. And I will say, we didn't put it on the slide for modesty reasons, but people are exceptionally happy with the services provided by my 24,000 colleagues at the City of Calgary. 95% of Calgarians say that they are pleased or very pleased with the services provided by the city. Governments anywhere else would kill for numbers like that. So I'm very, very pleased at the work that our 24,000 colleagues are doing. We got work to do. We still got work to do. 52% of people say that we need to work on growth and planning. 41% say we need to work on roads and infrastructure. These are key indicators for quality of life, and we continue to do that. We don't rest on our laurels. We continue to think of ways that we can make this city even better. Okay, I have to tell you that was the most dry address I have ever given. But I think it's important for this crowd to really see some of the data and to really understand what it is that we're trying to accomplish. But there's something much deeper than that. And the thing that's much deeper is really about reflecting on our good fortune as a community and what we have accomplished together and what we have managed to build together. I'd like to tell you a couple of quick stories. I had the chance this summer to spend a little bit of time at the Olympics in London. I was just on vacation. It was not taxpayer funded in any way, just so you know. But I was on vacation and I noticed that the thing that I love London, you know, I love cities. That's no surprise. Anyone who knows me knows that I love cities. And I particularly love London. I always have. But during the Olympics was London at its absolute best. I've never seen that city that great. And I realized that a lot of it had to do with all of these people on the street and at every venue who were wearing purple jackets, which I liked, who were the volunteers. And so, as you do when you're on vacation, I met with the Mayor of London, and I asked him, he is exactly what you think he is. And so I asked him about this and all these volunteers and how unbelievably happy they were. And I learned a couple of very interesting things. There were 70,000 volunteers at the London Games. No one ever called them volunteers. They only called them games makers. And which is, I think, great. And there was a beautiful advertising campaign about people who make the games. But 70,000 is a really big number. And so I kind of was trying to dig and pull the string and trying to understand this better. And I learned a couple of things. The first thing I learned was that 40% of the 70,000 people had never volunteered for anything before. And I thought that was very odd. I thought in Calgary, you would never be able to get together a group of any size and find 40% who had never volunteered in the community. And so I pulled the string a little bit more. And what I learned as I pulled the string a little bit more is that the games, the athletics of the Olympics were kind of a ruse. That London and the UK hadn't bid for the Olympics to have an athletic competition. There was actually another reason for it. And as a city that had invited people in from around the world for so many generations, they were very concerned that people didn't feel a sense of civic engagement or civic pride. And the Olympics were actually just an excuse to try and build up that sense of civic engagement in the community. And they deliberately chose people. They had 240,000 people apply to be volunteers in a city that has very little volunteer tradition. And they deliberately chose people who hadn't volunteered for things before to try and kickstart civic engagement in their community. I'm on their mailing list, their email list, and I just got an email this week saying, come to a celebration of the Olympics, and the celebration was a volunteer fair to try and get people to come and find new things to volunteer for. And I thought that that was fascinating because when we think about Calgary, you know, of course we had an Olympics, and that Olympics was entirely volunteer driven. But it was entirely volunteer driven because we didn't know any other way to do it. That has been our tradition. And to me, that is such an important part of who we are together as a community. That's why I wear this number 3. 3 things for Calgary, making this the year that every one of us commits to do 3 things for our community. It's an easy sell in this city. But one thing I'd like you to think about is not just how your city council is helping you have more successful business, how your city council is helping you live a better life in this great city. But also, I'd like you all to think about how you can recommit yourself to making the city even better. Many of you have heard the last anecdote that I'm going to tell you today, but I tell it a lot because I think it's really important. One of the most surprising things about my job is the sheer number of times that I get invited to centennial events. 100th anniversary of everything in Calgary. I talked to the historian laureate Harry Sanders, and he explained to me that in 1912, the population of Calgary was 62,000 people. In 1902, it had been 4,000 people. So 1912 was the height of Calgary's first great boom. And that's why we've celebrated the 100th anniversary of Calgary's Chinatown. There's been Chinese Calgarians as long as there have been Calgarians. The 100th anniversary of City of Calgary Parks, of Mount Royal University, of the YWCA of Calgary. In 2012, we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Calgary Public Library. We celebrate the 100th anniversary of Calgary Recreation, teaching people to swim for 100 years. The Pump House Theatres, the Grand Theatres, and on and on and on. By the way, Harry also told me that 1913 was Calgary's first big bust. Probably won't be going to very many 100th anniversary celebrations next year. And then there was that other one. The one that we celebrated this summer always slips my mind. Of course, the Centennial Stampede, which was an amazing event. But I don't want to talk about the Centennial Stampede. When the Stampede was started in 1912, they had a parade. 62,000 people in the city, 80,000 people showed up for the first Stampede parade. But the Governor General didn't make it in time. Typical of the federal government then as now, he was a bit late. So he came a bit later, and they threw him another parade. 30,000 people showed up, proving then as now nobody works during the Stampede. My point, and I do have one, the Governor General was the Duke of Connaught, the son of Queen Victoria. So it's no coincidence that this year my favorite 100th anniversary was celebrating the 100th anniversary of Connaught School, not that far from here. A school in downtown Calgary. And I remember going to Connaught School in the Beltline. And I remember looking out at the kids who were sitting there all in their matching t-shirts celebrating the 100th anniversary of their school. There were 240 kids in that school. They came from 61 different countries. They spoke 42 different languages at home. And because that school is in downtown Calgary, it is often the first stop for people who are coming to Canada. And I had the opportunity that day to talk to some of those kids. And I heard things. I heard stories of poverty, of war, of degradation, of violence so horrible that no human being should ever have to witness that, let alone a child. And it would have been easy that day to feel despair for humanity, to feel despair for the world. And you know what? I didn't. I didn't feel despair for the world because I knew one thing at that moment. One thing struck me with absolute clarity. And I knew one thing to be 100% correct. And that was that regardless of what horrible things had happened to these kids, what awful things had happened to their families, remember that the only thing they had in common was that every single one of them came here with nothing. The lucky ones had their parents, the unlucky ones didn't. But I knew that regardless of what had happened to them, they had had one enormous, enormous bolt of grace. One incredible stroke of luck. And that stroke of luck was that they ended up here. They ended up in Canada. They ended up in Alberta, they ended up in Calgary, they ended up at Connaught School. And I knew in that moment that those kids were going to be just fine because they had landed in a community that was going to look after them, that was going to allow them to live the best possible life they could live. To me, that's the promise of our community. That's what we need to recommit ourselves to. And that's what the work that we do, my council colleagues and I do every single day, to make sure that we can fulfill the promise of that community. And I hope that all of you will recommit yourselves to fulfilling that promise as well. 2 years and 4 days ago, you gave me and these folks an incredible opportunity to serve. And for that, I want to say thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I really don't know how to ask a business question after that kind of remarks.
I did that on purpose.
Yeah, good tactic. Ladies and gentlemen, you have question cards on your table. We do have few minutes of time to ask the Mayor some questions, so please fill them out. You'll see some chamber staff walking around. Please hand them off to them, and I'll do our very best to ask a few questions. So I've got a few to kick us off here, Your Worship, and just kind of scanning through here in line with that commitment. Any announcements today?
I had slides. That was sort of an
right.
announcement.
Okay. All right.
Soon.
We've got about 10 minutes left here, so. Okay, dodging that one, we'll go to the next question I've got on my list here. You've seen a lot of the feedback so far from the Cut the Red Tape. We know it hasn't been publicized, isn't in the public domain yet, but I wonder if you could maybe share with us some of the things that you would anticipate that the city would adopt or implement.
So the Cut Red Tape initiative started just about a year ago. And our first phase was to go out to our colleagues, our employees at the City of Calgary. And I'll tell you a funny story, and those of you who are managers in organizations will appreciate that sometimes the best planned things go a little awry. We launched Cut Red Tape with a budget of $0. We put a note on the City of Calgary intranet site, and we literally, no kidding, printed up a few posters and put them at water coolers around the city. And I thought my plan was that we would ask employees to say, what are some ideas for cutting the red tape? And I thought we would get a dozen responses. I would pick 3 or 4 of them, and we would make those people heroes in the organization, right? We would implement those, and we'd get more and more ideas. In fact, we got well over 200 ideas from our own employees from every business unit. And so my challenge really shifted from how do I make 3 or 4 of them heroes to how do we implement as many of them as possible. And many of them were small but deeply meaningful. For example, if you have to go up to the 3rd floor at City Hall, now you'll find simple things like it's easier to get an appointment time. You can book appointment times online. You can pay your parking there instead of having to run back to your truck. Silly things like that. But they really do make a difference for people. We've taken the process for building a duplex from a process that takes about 180 days to get approval to a process that takes 20 days to get approval. So there's a bunch of small things like that. You can, stupid one, but so important. When you're watching your kid at the swimming lesson and you realize they're going to pass to the next level, you can now sign up for the next swimming class while you're at the pool. You could never do that before. So I know. But we fixed a bunch of stuff like that. From the second phase, there were 2 big buckets of work that came from business. One of them had to do with, there was a lot of them that had to do with one business unit, which is planning, development, approvals. So those ones have all gone into the transforming planning process. We thought it was too big to fix at the Band-Aid level, and all of that has gone into input into this process. The rest were really simple things around the city's processes in different ways, from parking to how we deal with recreation and businesses that manage recreations. There's lots of neat ideas there. And they're all kind of working their way through the system right now to see what's feasible, what's possible. I'll give you one example. I have no idea if we can actually implement this, but one example we got was from the real estate industry. And they said, because we're showing commercial and residential sites all day, can we buy a day pass on Park Plus? so that I can park in different spots without having to always log in and log out to my account. Sounds easy to me. I don't know if the technology will allow it, but those are the sorts of ideas that we're trying to push forward.
Okay. We had Roland Stanley speak a few weeks ago about transforming planning. What are some of your directions to him, things that you're expecting back based on some of the feedback you've heard from the development industry?
So I've been pretty straightforward that I want to make it easier for people to build good stuff. And the question is, how do you define good stuff? And sometimes we get caught up in a conversation around, well, it's all in the eye of the beholder, it's very subjective, it's very arbitrary, but that's actually not true. We have the municipal development plan in place, we have the Calgary transportation plan in place, we have guidelines in place already. So we kind of know what good stuff looks like, and we've agreed to that. So how do we make it easier for people to go through that whole process? I've told Roland that, in my opinion, everything is on the table. If we can do it legally under our Municipal Government Act, it's on the table. If it contravenes the Municipal Government Act, it's still on the table because it'll be part of our city charter discussion. But I think the whole process of separating land use from development permits from building permits is needlessly confusing, and it segregates important questions into buckets where sometimes you want to think about them holistically. I'll say one controversial thing, because you haven't had anything controversial yet today. There is a commensurate requirement to the industry here. You cannot come as the industry and say to us, it takes too long for me to get my approvals if you're bringing us crap. You know what the MDP guidelines are, you know what the CTP guidelines are, you know what the urban design guidelines are. So if you bring us stuff that you know violates those guidelines, and then you complain that it's taking too long to get an approval, well, there's a reason for that. I know that many of the people in the industry are capable of building much better because they get there after all the negotiation. So I say to the industry, bring us your best bet first instead of what you hope will slide through. And then we can work together to remove the processes to make sure that you can build that good stuff quickly.
Okay, thank you. Just very last question here, very quickly. Apologize, folks.
I
for
went
not
on
being
and
able
on,
to
I
get,
apologize.
Yeah, it's his fault.
It always is.
So Calgary is not the weekend destination it needs to be to drive tourism, hence our economy is not at full potential. Your plans?
Okay. So, you know, tourism is a funny thing because when you think about it from a pure selfish City of Calgary municipal government perspective, we actually get nothing from tourism. Isn't that a terrible thing to say? But when the tourists come into the city, they actually, we don't get sales tax from them, that's the federal government. You know, we don't get a hotel tax from them, that's the hotel association, and so on and so on and so on. Yet we fund tourism, right? We fund Tourism Calgary, and it's an interesting place that we've ended up. That said, Tourism Alberta has just gone through a major review of how we do tourism in the whole province, including a review of Tourism Calgary. I have the report on my desk, I haven't read it yet, it's come home with me every weekend for the last 2 weeks, but there's a lot of reading. But I'm looking forward to seeing what those are. I think Tourism Alberta and Tourism Calgary have both been renewed with a great new sense of energy. I think the second Remember to Breathe campaign, if you haven't seen it, for Tourism Alberta is amazing. The first one was also amazing, but it implied that nobody in Alberta lived in a settlement of more than 2 people. So the new one has pictures of actual cities, which is nice. And I'm looking to Tourism Alberta to say, you know, about a third of tourists to Alberta come to Calgary, and yet about 80% of their spend is on the mountains. And I'm looking for a better mix of that.
Okay, great. I think that's unfortunately all the time we have.
Give me a lightning round. We got 3 minutes.
Lightning
before
round? All
1:30.
right, okay, we'll do our lightning round here.
Adam and I do this all the time. He's going to read
Okay.
all the questions, and I'll try and answer them all.
All right. How is the Transforming Government initiative proceeding? Where would you like it to go?
Very well. Early days yet. It's tough to turn around organizational change in a group of 24,000 people. But the city employees, our colleagues, are incredibly positive about it, incredibly positive about giving up old ways to do things. I think it's going to be great.
How do you establish your performance benchmarks for Cut the Red Tape?
Good question. We're still working on it. You know, in BC and in Saskatchewan, they just did it on number of regulations reduced, which I think is a bit silly. What we're tracking right now to see how well it works is the amount of time citizens are saving and the amount of money that is being saved both by citizens and by government. And, you know, basically in very, very early days, we're up to thousands of hours and hundreds of thousands of dollars on both sides.
I'm not sure this one is within the city remit, but we'll see what your thoughts are. What can the city do to make education better, particularly in the inner city and suburbs where you have a different dynamic?
Not in our purview, really for the provincial government, but I will tell you that the city needs to have a much better relationship both with the school boards and the provincial government in terms of planning. So for example, the Calgary Board of Education was interested in closing a particular inner city school this year in a neighborhood where we have seen in our city data that young families are moving to in big numbers. It's starting to gentrify. The Board of Ed didn't know that. And so we had to have a conversation with them and say, don't close this school because you're going to have a ton of kids living in this neighborhood in the next decade. So we have to open up the conversation, be able to work much better, both on education and on healthcare.
Great, and that's the end of our lightning round. So now my pleasure to introduce Mike Gladstone to come up and thank the mayor on behalf of BFI and the Chamber. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will keep this brief. I know we all have meetings to get to, and last thing I want to do is be late for mine or for yours.
Blame me.
But obviously,
I'll give you a late slip.
my boss always says you can't be late when you're with the teacher. But obviously, thank you to the Chamber of Commerce for putting this lunch on today. I think obviously we all agree, I think in this room, how great it is to have an active and vibrant chamber representing our interests and business here in the city. And of course, the relationship with this mayor is fantastic. I think that was one of the best and most informative presentations I've been to by a mayor, probably ever. So thank you. And I'll just leave you with one thought, which is the fact that, love to see the fact that you called Calgary a city of innovators. I think that's great, and I just venture to say that ultimately it would be through innovation that we get to replace Vancouver as the #1 green city as well. Innovation that we think we bring to this city as BFI Canada with the largest recycling facility opening up in the province of Alberta in about a month. So again, Mayor, thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Thank you.